Now, what I'll do is I'll simply create a folder here. I'll call it backend. So on this folder backend, this is where I'll do all my backend scripting. Okay. So this is how we'll now separate the logic. That this other part now will look like everything we've been doing before now. Okay. So now on this backend part, let me just create a test file here first. Test.php. Okay. Now on this test file, like PHP, just like every every programming language that you can do some basic programming on. Okay. For instance, you can declare variables. By declaring variables on PHP, you just have to append dollar sign for the variable name. Yes. Now this thing now, that one now, you can write PHP inside here. You understand? You can write PHP inside here. It will still work as long as the extension is .php. Now this is raw PHP file now. No HTML attached to it. Okay. Now this is how you open your PHP. This is how you close it. Okay. Then declaring variables now. You simply add a dollar sign. A dollar sign with the variable name. Let's say the variable name is let's say age. Okay, is equal to, then you pass a value to it. Now, one thing with modern programming language is that um, the data type is not really relevant when you are working with them, because any value you assign to the variable determine which data type it is. Okay, that is, as I assign 9 to this age now, automatically it sees this age as integer variable. Okay, so if I have another variable like I say name is equal to destiny, for instance. Okay, now it sees this as a string. Okay, so if I say is logged in equals true, it sees this as boolean. So that's just how PHP works. Okay, so this is variables in PHP. Yes, dollar sign the variable name. Okay, so that's how you declare variables in PHP. I don't want to go deep into PHP programming. Okay, but if you go to your W3 school, you see you can learn the details of PHP programming. Okay, okay, sorry, the network is off. Okay, so you can see more details there. But the major thing I want to focus on is just to give you a clue on what you see while working with our HTML and that's our front end. Okay, so now apart from variable declaration, functions, your control structures like your if statement, your switch are the same thing. That means I can create an if statement like if, just the normal way you create an if statement, like if this login, for instance, is equal to true. Okay, this is just the normal if statement like other programming languages that you're used to. You can also have your else if you want to condition, then uh, uh, the what's it called, the statement, what you want it to do. You can also have your else. Okay, so coming from other programming language, since you understand all these programming structures, you're good to go. Okay, same thing with the switch. You can as well do a switch statement where you switch the variable. You have different cases. Case this, case that, case that. Okay. Same thing with your for loop, your while loop, and the rest. Okay. So now, but the major thing we are going to do here now is to learn how to work with our PHP from uh, from our front end. Okay. So now the first thing first we need to understand a front end is a front end is on its own, just like a part of your application on its own that is self-contained, in the sense that the front end will have all the elements it takes except the data that it will need. Okay. Now, what you should know how to do as a front-end developer is get data from a back-end script through any means by simply making HTTP request. And when you make HTTP request, the request will give you uh, data. And that data that will give to you, you know how to make use of it from your front end. Okay. Now, let me uh, do something here now. So this link here now is a dummy, is a link for dummy data of users. Is I know I have a copilot on my PS Code. That's why I just suggested it. Okay. So this is just an example where dummy data, there are dummy data here. Okay. Now if you watch this dummy data from our last class, when we're treating methods and array, you find sorry, objects and array. You find out that this whole thing now is a form of array. This is 0, 1, 2. So each of the array have an object of users. Okay? Each element of the array have is an object of users. So now this is an example of something we can do. Let's assume this is from a backend. Okay, this one is it's, let's say the backend or an API now. It's the same thing. This data that you are getting here now, how do we make use of them in our page? Okay. Now this one is different from creating our own backend now. Okay. Okay. So now what we're going to first of all do is to get this data and use it. Then later we'll now create a backend of our own that will pull data like this. Because for us to work with data from our backend, we need to uh, first of all set up the database where the data will be stored into. Then we'll now be retrieving the data from the data. Okay. Now in JavaScript is what you can use actually to make those such requests. Okay. So now in JavaScript now, this Ajax HTTP request now is the normal way of making requests. Now what's Ajax now? Ajax is simply an acronym for asynchronous JavaScript. Let me see if I can from the intro here. So we will talk about it on the intro here. But normally it's asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Okay, that is the full meaning of Ajax. Now, what it does is it can go to a web server, read data from a web server. Okay, after the page has been loaded, update the page without reloading the page. That means in real time, okay, in real time, as you are on the page, you can send a request to a web server anywhere, locate the web server, fetch the data from the web server, and bring it to your app. Okay, so that is the work of Ajax. Okay, now running Ajax now is simply by making a HTTP request like this. Okay. Now this HTTP request now that you see now is okay. First of all, you say HTTP.open. Then this is the method. Then this is the URL. Okay. This is the URL, and the parameter set to true. Okay, true or false. If it's asynchronous or synchronous. Now what this means is if it's to wait for that request to complete before doing another thing. Because now the thing is you are sending a message to the server to get data. Okay. Should it wait for that data to come before you continue? Or should you continue what it's doing while the data loads in the background? That is what it means by that asynchronous and synchronous. Okay? If it's asynchronous, that is to say it can continue with what it's doing while the data loads in the background. But if it's synchronous, that means you have to wait for the data to come first before it continues. Now, in the aspect, if you want to make, let's say the data that is coming from the backend, you want to use it for something, you have to be synchronous. You get have to be synchronous because since you want to make use of that data, you have to wait for the data to come back from the back end before you make use of it. Okay, so that's just it. So with this now, you can send a request. You can send a request to the back end, get data. Now, if you get data now, what will you do with data now? That's where the response now comes in. That means when you send request, you get a response back. Okay, so you get a response back now, and this is how you make use of the response. So this is the how the response look like. Okay, so like this now, unload this this is a constant. Okay, let me just use this guy now to explain this. Now this is a constant. Okay, just like you can put this can be anything of your choice. Okay, now it's making XML HTTP request. XML HTTP request. Okay, now this XML HTTP request is a JavaScript default class. Okay, that handles AJAX. Okay, that handles AJAX. So here now it's just like you're creating an object of this XML HTTP request class. Now this object now have this unload method which can be called when the request is loaded, fully loaded. Okay. Now you open with a method. This is the HTTP request method. Just like we said, the method can be get, can be post, can be put, can be delete. Okay. So any one of them you're using will be inserted here. Why this particular one now is the URL where you are getting the data from. Okay, then here is simply to send the request. Okay, so this is just like uh, kind of configuring, doing all the configuration first before sending the request. Now here is where the response will come to. Okay, this is where the response will come to. So for instance now, if we want to do something like that, okay, sorry, so I can have something like maybe a script here. So I will simply declare maybe a constant, let me call it XHR, that's XML HTTP request is equals, I can say new XML HTTP request. Okay, then I will simply say, before I do the open thing, I'll simply say SHR, okay, dot unload is equal to, I'll simply put a method for it. Okay, now this status is simply telling if the response is successful. Okay. Now every HTTP request have a response code. Okay. That is another thing again. You can still make research. Okay. HTTP request response code. Okay. There are a lot of them. Okay. If you come here now, you're going to see different response code. Successful response from 200 to 299. Okay. And from information response, redirection, client blah, 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 error, and the rest. Okay. Error, server error are usually 500. That's why you see error 500, something like that, or 500 and something, server error. And when you have from 400 to something, you know that the client error. You understand? So all these are the error whatsoever. So here now, you simply say, okay, if the status is 200, which is if the status is if that request is okay, then give us the response test. What came with the response? Okay, then uh, we can do S. Okay, if you want to. Else, that means if the response is not successful, okay, now just log something went wrong for us. Okay, then after that, I can now open the request. Okay, now I can put the method I need to use. Then this one now will be the the what's it called, URL. Now we saw a URL of users here, so we can just put this URL like this now inside here. Okay, so when we do this and I save this request, okay, now if we come to this page, we open our console, okay, then refresh our page. Okay, sorry, am I getting this error? Okay, let me, I deleted some of all those things. Okay, okay, we have to send it to, so this is just configuring, then we send the request. Okay, that is why we didn't have this, what's it called here. So let's refresh our page. Now, if you watch what happened now, it got everything for us here. You understand? It got all the users for us here. But the problem here now is these users that we got here now, it just got them as tests, response tests. So we can kind of format them because they are already originally in a JavaScript object notation that's JSON format. Okay, so we will simply do what they call, let's just say rs test. Let's say this is, that's response test equals to this response test. Okay, then what we simply do is we simply say json dot pass. Okay, so we pass the response test. Now I can declare that variable. We are in JavaScript, so we have to use either let or var. Okay, and I can say let response be equals to json.pass. Okay, then what I'll do, I'll console.log the response. Okay, so now this thing now is in plain text. Okay, and look at how it will come this time around. It's no longer in plain text, telling you that it's an array now. So with this array now, you can get anything you want to get. So the JSON pass now is just like formatting it into a JSON format so that we can make use of it in our any way we want to make use of it. Okay. For instance, now if I have a list here, for instance, okay, sorry, let's say under here I have a UL. Okay, under here I have a UL. I have an LI here. Now this LI, now let's say for instance I want the name of everybody. Okay. Now inside any of this object now I have a name. Okay, so let's just say, let me just use one as an example. Let's say I have Evelyn. I don't know if it's correct. Okay, and with Evelyn, I can have maybe James. I can also have, let's say, uh, Amanda. It's just like assuming we're typing it manually. So we'll have a list like this now. Okay. So now, if for instance we want to build a list like this, but with what we are getting from here now, okay, I can simply do this. I can simply say, okay, since this guy now with this JSON pass is converting it into an array, we can simply do something like for each of this response as a user, okay? Or we can change this variable to users because we know it's a list of users that we're getting, okay? So I can simply say users dot for each, okay, for each, okay. Now for each now, I have to put a function in it, function user, then each of this user. But before I do this for each, let me declare a variable. Let's say let list be equal to an empty string, okay. Now when the list is an empty string, what do? We now say list plus equal to, that means we want to accumulate the entire list. Don't mind this my copilot, not generating my this for me. Okay, so an entire list. So I'll have the list like this. Okay, user.name. Okay, so it will kind of accumulate this whole list into this variable. Okay, then here now I don't need this list here now. Okay, so what I'll simply do is I'll give this an ID. Okay, when I give it an ID, I'll simply say, um, okay, let's say users list, or let's just say users as the ID. Okay, so what we'll do is after we must have accumulated all the users on this list, okay, we'll now simply say a document dot get element by ID users dot inner HTML is equal to the list. That means this list that we have here now. So with this, if you refresh, when it comes back, for each is not a function. Okay, sorry, I made a mistake. For each, the E is capital E. Okay, so let's see. See, automatically pull from this guy, pull the data into here. Okay, so that is what it takes to be a front end developer. You must know how to work with data that are coming from either an API or maybe a dedicated or a custom backend. Okay, and how you get this data is through making HTTP requests, just like this one we just made now. We can decide to use, let's say, styling with your tailwind and the rest. We can decide to style it in cards. You understand? You can decide to style it in card, populate the cards with this. Okay, let's try that. Okay, let's try that.